Hey guys, what's going on? This is Dan Hillary. Today I'm talking about just an overview of how to size your MSTR portfolios. I know a lot of people are 100% MSTR, some people are 100% Bitcoin, some people have a combination of calls, some people have in-the-money calls. I just wanted to explore what kind of upside possibilities there are for potential MSTR prices and what kind of downside limitations there may be by sizing different positions in your MSTR Bitcoin portfolio. So let me hop into it here. For the purposes of this video, I used 7 different model portfolios. They all assume you start with $10 million worth of capital, 20% of the fund is in Bitcoin cold storage, and the options I'm using for the sake of this video are in the money options, near the money options, and out of the money options. The near the money options have a $250 strike, in the money $100 strike, and the 380 strike are out of the money options. These are all dated for December 19th, 2025, and the premiums I have listed on the right here. It also assumes a marginal tax rate of less than 5%. For the purposes of this video, I didn't want to include the implications of exercising versus selling calls. The multiple on invested capital is how I designed the Bitcoin reserve for this portfolio. So this would be like a crazy bullish MSTR portfolio. But according to the power law, if you believe it or if you don't, I think it's the best model we have in terms of a 10-year time frame. Bitcoin should be at $1 million in around 9 years. If that is the case, then you'd get a 3x multiple on invested capital in 9 years if you invest 20% of the portfolio in Bitcoin today. That's kind of a worst case backstop if MSTR goes to zero. Using APSK's price target here, we have a cycle top around 200, 250K per coin. Using the channel decay oscillator, Smithson widths, we have a 200, 220K top, and then CINA 21st is about 200K with the volatility adjusted power law index. All of that being said, I've used Bitcoin prices up to 300K to model different MSTR prices, which are plotted on the x-axis here. These are post-split MSTR share prices, and you can see the portfolio value along the y-axis based on the different allocations here. I include these different allocations up at the top of my 3 or 4 zoomed in charts, and they're supposed to give you a reference of how different allocations of shares, call options, and spot Bitcoin affect your payout at different hypothetical MSTR prices. At all of these higher MSTR prices, this blue portfolio outperforms everything else. The blue portfolio is 20% cold storage Bitcoin, 80% 380 strike MSTR calls, dated for December 19th, 2025. And these obviously will outperform. However, you're taking on substantial risk, and you'll see that as we zoom into the lower price targets. At 120K Bitcoin, these are my MSTR prices. They might be higher, they might be lower. This isn't a predictive video, it's just kind of an outline for you. At these low price targets, this red portfolio performs quite well. And this red portfolio is portfolio number 3. That is 20% cold storage Bitcoin, 80% in the money calls. And these in the money calls are great at these low moves because they move very, very significantly as they're already in the money. So you can see a $300 MSTR share price and a $400 MSTR share price and even a $500 MSTR share price. This is the top performing portfolio. However, that doesn't outpace 20% Bitcoin and 80% MSTR spot shares by that much. And this, in my opinion, is a much, much, much less risky trade. You don't have to even sell the calls. You don't have to exercise the calls. You can ride this MSTR holdings for the next 10 years if you need to. So holding the spot shares at these lower price targets seem to perform much better. Now I'll just go over some of the other portfolios. Portfolio 7 is 20% Bitcoin, 60% MSTR shares, 20% out of the money calls. You can see here you don't get hit that hard at the lower MSTR strikes, even by holding 20% of those deep out of the money calls. Now you can see the blue portfolio, which is 80% out of the money calls, performs horrendously at these low MSTR prices because these options contracts aren't even in the money. They only start to get in the money at $380 per MSTR share, and you can see they start performing quite well at $500 per share. Now, again, that full allocation of MSTR calls that are far out of the money start to take over at around $600 per share. Again, that's a much too risky allocation for me, so I would never do it. I just wanted to include it in this video. The red, the yellow, and the orange seem to keep pretty good pace, or the best pace at least, with this all out of the money call option. And these portfolios are portfolio 1, the golden kind of color, 20% MSTR shares, 30% in the money calls, and 30% out of the money calls. This is supposed to provide a good cushion at these lower prices and these higher prices. So you can see here at the low prices, the in the money calls take over and really boost the performance of the portfolio, and at the higher prices of MSTR, the in the money calls still perform relatively well, but the out of the money calls take over and really boost the portfolio. Now let's look at the red. What is the red? The red is portfolio number 3, and that is 20% Bitcoin and 80% in the money calls. So this is essentially just leverage in your portfolio. You're not necessarily taking on significant risk per se. You're taking on risk in the sense that your portfolio will be highly, highly volatile, both up and down. However, there's a low likelihood that MSTR drops below $100 per share, in my opinion. So it's less risky than strictly out of the money calls. Now, the pink, which is the 80% MSTR spot shares, begins to underperform once you start moving farther and farther away from that $380 strike. And you can see this, it's evidenced here in these portfolios. So again, my favorite portfolio is the 20% Bitcoin, 80% or 40% MSTR shares, and 40% out of the money calls. That is the portfolio number 2, which is the orange portfolio, and you can see how well it's keeping pace with the farther out of the money, or the fully out of the money calls, and you can see how it performs okay at $300 per share, and then really keeps pace and begins to outperform the rest of the options at $500 per share. Now, let's continue looking at these charts. At 200K Bitcoin and these MSTR prices, you get all of these payouts, and then this is 250K per Bitcoin at these MSTR share prices. Again, this is getting super hyper bullish in my opinion, and obviously the out of the money calls will take over and outperform. But you can see the portfolio that has a significant holding of out of the money calls is keeping pace quite well, the orange portfolio, and still the yellow portfolio, which has a percentage of in the money calls and a percentage of out of the money calls, is keeping pace quite well. And then the in the money calls actually does keep up. You know, you have leverage in the form of in the money call options, and they won't multiply as fast as when those out of the money calls become in the money, but they're still keeping decent pace with the rest of the portfolio. And now the crazy hyper bullish scenario, Bitcoin at 300K at all of these different price targets. The data is pretty much the same after $800 per share, $700 per share, even $600 per share. The out of the money calls really begin to dominate your portfolio. And if you're hyper bullish on MSTR, I recommend anyone hold a portion of their stack, even if it's 5% or 10%, in these deep out of the money calls in order to capitalize on these tail scenarios where MSTR blows past a $380 strike and goes exponential in the bull run. Thanks for watching. That's all I've got today, and I will catch you next time.